congratulations on the release, man. That is a lot of work. I could tell from everything going on in the Discord that it took a real team effort to get this thing out.
Yeah, that was it was certainly a big release for us. A fun side fact: we've been trying to get this out probably for the last 2-3 weeks and always pushed it back because we had this one more thing to come in, and I think that's like early pains of a very young project, but I'm actually very happy that we have the release out, and actually took half a day off today because it was quite stressful to get this out of the door.
I'm surprised. I mean, 3 months since the last spec revision. I mean, that's pretty quick. Like, was there something like really pushing it, like kind of some driving factor?
I think there's a few things that we really want to get out of the door, but there's also like this aspect of like, I do want to have releases at a cadence, and I'm not sure how good this is going to work for a protocol, but for a project in general, doing it by a cadence rather than by like when we feel it's done works way better to make sure that not everybody crams in everything into that one release and it becomes this like super bloated thing. And so we do want to move somewhat fast, but also not make sure that we don't lose like client implementers and others at the pace we're going. But in this case here, there's one really important part that I know people find very, very boring probably, but we got authorization in the previous spec somewhat wrong for certain scenarios. And that mostly stems from the fact that I did work this out by myself for the most part, and I understood a lot of like how authorization works in the web, but I didn't understand like on the public web, and that's what it was modeled after. But I didn't understand very well how authorization works in enterprises with like centralized IDPs, like identity providers. And so we had some really big issues that it didn't really work well for the centralized IDP scenarios. And so this spec this time around massively changes how we're doing authorization and greatly improves how it works, particularly for enterprises. It's somewhat backwards compatible with the old one, but it makes it much easier for enterprises to build MCP servers with a centralized IDP. That was a big change.
That one caught, I think everyone was watching that pretty closely that is thinking about this as an enterprise protocol, because, I know I've had multiple conversations since the conference where the OAuth piece is probably number one in enterprise sort of requirements. I know there were some other big things too, though. I mean, in addition to OAuth, can you talk a little bit about elicitation? Because I think that's really interesting, and I'm super excited to see, I'm super excited for my first MCP to ask me something back.
Yeah, elicitation is interesting. I think elicitation is interesting twofold, but I think on one hand is like the first addition to the primitive since basically the original protocol. So the last revision didn't have like an addition to the protocol. So this is the first edition. I'm curious to see how it goes. But the more interesting part is like what it's trying to enable, right? Like, so at the moment, the MCP server, if it wants additional information from you as a user, like, hey, give me your contact information, or the database you specified is not quite clear to me, like which of the 5 you actually want, or I don't know, like there's like so many like ideas where you like, I want clarifying information from the user, and the way you would do it previously was like send it back to the via tool call and basically hope that the model will ask the user, and then the user adds it to the like in the chat window, and this works, but it's not like, it's on one hand side not very structured, and on the other hand side it's not it goes into the flow, and most importantly, it's still probabilistic if the model actually asks you or not, right? But so elicitation is a way to like basically to tell the client, no, here's my intent. I'm intending to ask the user something. I really want this, and that's quite useful. That's particularly useful if you chain MCP servers in a way where you have like one MCP server that calls another MCP server, and that other MCP server wants to get an elicitation. Because it's at the intent that the user wants to do, you can bubble it up. Even if you run your own MCP, like your own agentic loop in the middle, you now can distinguish, hey, I actually want to bubble this up. And so I think that's a very good use case for elicitation. So that's one of the big new additions. And I know Darren has thoughts on it because you implemented it. Like, tell me what you're actually doing with it, because you like last minute swooped in with like the wording about accept, decline, and cancel is really bad. We should do it accept, reject, and cancel. And I wouldn't do like some of the native speaker. I'm not a native speaker. And they're like, oh yeah, Darren's idea is clearly better. And so we just change it, I think, 10 minutes before the spec.
I was really surprised. I felt, because it was like, you guys have been working on this spec, and it was literally like, we're going to push it out today. And I came into Discord. I'm like, I really think you should change this word. And I'm like, I asked ChatGPT, and ChatGPT said this was the better word.
It's right, like completely right.
Because so what I really like about elicitations is, I mean, it's a way for the MCP server to just ask the user things, and so you could collect additional information. But I think one of like the primary place where I'm seeing it, it's really nice, is pretty much just for confirmations. Is like, do you actually want to do this? Yes. Because the previous, like the current model is basically, like Claude will say like, do you want to call this tool? And you can kind of say like, it's basically, do you trust this tool? And then like, do you want to accept it, like, going further or whatever? But like, that doesn't give the best user experience. Because you don't want to confirm every single tool, even though there's hints, there's some things or whatever. But what I found particularly nice was, because I was coding through an example where it's like the tool, I wanted to inside the tool do like 3 or 4 steps. And then at the very end, right before I gathered, because it was like, well, I'll use like let's say like booking a flight, like a, obvious example or whatever. It's like, you have to collect like the source and the destination and whether or not they have funds or blah, 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 collect all this information so the tool can find all that and then present it to the user like during the tool call or whatever, and be like, do you want to continue? Here's some more information about it. So that's what I was specifically, was just basically trying to add all of those kind of like enterprise guardrails and stuff that people want, so it's like, oh, before this action. So that's what I was using elicitations for.
It makes 100% sense. I think that's like the most common use. Like I use like MCP servers to like manage my Kubernetes clusters and stuff, like my private ones. I'm like, I do want to really get a confirmation if you're trying to delete like a pod for me or a deployment.
Yeah. Right. And I just found it's like, because it's this weird thing where it's like, right now the host has the user confirm if they trust the tool, but I don't think that's really the right behavior for like confirming action. So I think this is really the right thing. I want so the tools need to be implemented properly. And so like, it's worked out really well, because I was prototyping a, kind of like a cursor. I was just trying to see like, how difficult would it be to just write like a cursor implementation, just 100% with MCP. And, a lot of these things where it's like, hey, not just like confirmations, but like, it's like committing the session, like, oh, I've made these changes. And like, do you actually want to commit these things? And I mean, I guess it's still confirmation, but there's a certain amount of interaction that happens like in the cursor window. That's not just typing a prompt. There's more, so it's really interesting. Yeah,
it's a really exciting feature. The other one that I know I wanted to hear more about was this sort of kind of the structured tool output side. I think that part, I've been just interested since your talk a little bit about that. So what's the thinking behind it? Maybe walk us through the use cases you guys are envisioning with that one.
Structured tool output is an interesting one, because I don't think if you look at it, it's not perfectly clear to people just yet, like, why would I want this? Yeah. But there's 1 or 2 good examples that I had in mind. And I think the number one is Eric Meyer, of various like computer science fame, had actually wanted us to do this. And his point was like, at the moment, if you have multiple tool calls in a row, LLMs would have to go and say, you return a result, and then the LLM parses it and then creates the next tool call from it, right? So that's one thing. But it has to do this one more turn in order to take the structured output, the unstructured output, restructure it, and put it back into the next tool call, for example. So one thing that we hope this will enable in the long run, and I don't think that the models are just there yet, or some of the APIs are there yet, is if you have multiple tools, suddenly LLMs can compose them. They can say, I want this and this and this in a row, right? Call these 3 things in a row. And so you now have composable parts. That's one aspect to that. There's another aspect that if you, for whatever reason, and I actually don't have a good example to be blunt with you, want to be able to parse it on the application side as well, having structure helps significantly because you don't have to fully rely on a model at all times. And you might be able to represent, for example, a tool call in a much nicer way under the assumption that the unstructured and the structured output are the same, but like it might give you more clarity of like, here's how it actually looks like, the return value. Here's some of the bits you want to look at. I can nicely display this in a formal fashion. And you might actually get like to points where I can totally see the community and some of the clients basically build like a common set of well understood schemas that are rendered in certain ways that currently wouldn't be possible, and that we might actually never define this in the spec, but are de facto what actually like people will do, and like render a certain type, like a certain schema always as a table or like as a certain UI component, and you might can see this. And so it's a bit more of an exploratory thing that we wanted to put in, but I do hope that it will have a lot of utility. It is also done in a way that it coexists with the existing work. So it's not really, you're not losing something, but it's more like, let's see what we can do with this. So that's my take on it. But
anyway. Yeah, that was interesting because like I had the same question of like, what was this really used for? Because kind of the latter example of like applications parsing it, that one didn't make sense to me. But I didn't consider the giving the LLM additional context, because this is like something we would see where it's like one of the problems of, you know, people like, oh, I'll take my open API schema and turn it into MCP, which is just a terrible idea. And one of the troubles you see with that is like, well, the response that's coming back from your API, AI just has to infer based, you know, reading it, just kind of infer what it is. Yeah. And so a lot of things are just not very clear. Yeah. And so it's like when you create APIs for you know MCP, it's like, well, then just make them a lot more logical, and you know AI is going to read it. But if you can give that additional context, I imagine that it would be, you know, much better at it. Yeah. That's really interesting.
Also, interestingly, you can have the model and then write code that calls a tool, takes the return value, modifies the return value in code, and calls the next tool.
Yeah. Yeah,
David, I know you have a hard stop. I don't want to keep you too long because I've got a million other things to work on. This is an incredible release, man. Well done. Is there any ideas? What's like right on the horizon? What are you working on next? What should we be kind of expecting to see as the next?
Yeah. There's a bunch. But before we do this, I do want to give a big shout out. Like this release is like the previous release was mostly done by the original team at Anthropic, but this is not. This release is the first time where like the whole community, companies like Microsoft, Google, AWS, OpenAI, all had contributions to this specification, came together in various forms and shapes and make this happen. And I think it's a big release in the sense of like, I consider this the first really community release. And I think that's big for the protocol and it's big for the project. So I just want to give a shout out to everyone who's like really hard work on this. Like the authorization specification, there are like people from Okta, from AWS, from Microsoft that have really worked hard, giving us the enterprise perspective, giving us the perspective of people who have actually written OR specifications. Literally one of the parts of the OR specification landed to become a final RFC while we are in the mix of doing this, that we added to the specification because we worked with the author on it. And so it's really, really good. And I just want to highlight that.
You feel like that's growing, the number of people contributing was like, was there a big wave that you saw that explode in?
It's at the point where we need to formalize the model of how we deal with this because it's becoming too much, like for the informal way we have dealt with it. And so we will see changes here. And I think that leads next into like what's next, right? Like if you look into the roadmap, there is still more in the like things we want to explore. There are things we need to do that are more obvious, that we have not done yet. There's a lot of proposals around like smaller changes on on the different aspects of like resources or how prompts are handled, or these type of like little things that we have, things to authorization and other aspects that we still want to make. But then I think there's a big question around like, do we want to do something around asynchronous tasks, for example, like something that allows a bit more clearer communication of the intent for a user interface, that this is a task that will return eventually and not right now, and you can continue in your conversation, for example. I think that's a big part of that we want to focus on in the next spec. There are changes like we want to probably have some form of like discoverability of like how do you, like for remote servers in particular, of like what does this server offer in terms of like common like well-known /mcp.json type of like files, so that you can nicely render a remote MCP server, have a logo, have whatever, have a description of what it's doing. So there's a lot of these type of thing, and like lots of work and security we need to do. But I really think the big things between like what I call evolutionary things is more like the the agentic part, which is more like a step function, getting a bit more like how we helping people to build agents with MCP. And then besides that, I think a big focus of mine at the moment is formalizing governance and formalizing these processes to have the project scale better. I think that's a big one, to really allow everyone to have a voice and to make sure that this is a truly open source community driven effort, which it is. But I want to make sure that people are clear, like, how can I participate? What does it take to make a proposal? What do I need to do? These type of things, these need to be clear. And that's what I'm working on at the moment for the most part.
That's super exciting. I think the governance stuff is going to be really, it's always a little challenging, but once it's done, it's going to really allow the scaling. I can't imagine though dealing with it right now, just ever since we had the conference. I mean, I must have had 20 people reach out to me just, hey, is there any way you can help me connect to the people at Anthropic working on this? I'm like, dude, no, I don't. I mean,
it's getting a bit much sometimes. Yeah.
It's insane. I can't imagine your inbox. It must be just overwhelmed because the number of people called me. I'm like, dude, I just no. I'm sorry. That's not really
how it is. Yeah.
I love it. I love how you guys have really kind of welcomed people in on the Discord. I think it's really, this is what open source can be. You guys are doing an excellent job of making it accessible and communicating it. I know you need to run, so I don't want to keep you much longer, but thank you, David, for coming in here last minute, just after the announcement, to come join us and talk about it. I know everyone's super excited about the release.
Yep. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you too.
Awesome. Have a wonderful day.